I have, of course, done the necessary preparation and have the CV, so I am well placed to tell you how many degrees she's got, where she got them from, how many universities she's taught at, what are the titles of the various jobs that she has held. And that all seems a little dull, so I thought I might mention a few other things to you instead. Because there are plenty of other aspects to her career. Indeed, she has other careers. She has had a career, for example, as a qualified windsurfing instructor. She did this in Spain, and in the intervals of windsurfing managed to acquire fluent Spanish to add to fluent German and English and Italian and French. And she found the time to finish off her PhD on Italian Renaissance poetry at the same time also. More recently, she has had a career as a painter, a very successful painter, very widely reproduced in miniature form, and with a sideline in extortion. In fact, if you get out of here without subscribing to the Vice-Chancellor's fund, you will have done very well. All of this may give you the impression of unflinching and unfailing success, so it's perhaps worth mentioning she also has a season ticket for Arsenal. Tonight, however, she is here obviously as an academic. She is extraordinarily well qualified to talk to us on the subject of what is a university for. Her own research background is in leadership, particularly in that context, and in university performance. So I'm sure that she will have much to say to us that will be interesting, entertaining, stimulating, and well worth hearing. Petra.
Thank you very much, Keir. I must admit I was a bit worried when I had a phone call this afternoon saying, where did you learn your Spanish? Was it during windsurfing? I thought, oh, what is Keir going to say? But, thank you. Okay, it was easy choosing a topic for my lecture tonight, because living in such exciting political times and universities having undergone tremendous change in the last decade in particular, the chosen topic for tonight seemed indeed very relevant and topical. However, I had not realized that I was far from original in choosing this topic. In fact, when I Googled the exact title of the topic, I found 26,300 entries. Well, reassuringly though, I discovered that each entry I managed to have a closer look at had its own perspective on the topic, and that there still seemed plenty of room for discovery and a fresh angle. Well, similarly, reactions to invitations for this lecture demonstrated that people have very different expectations and opinions about universities and about tonight. For example, one person wrote to me, "This topic is particularly apposite for today's financial climate, new Scottish government and the UK economy." Indeed, one guest exclaimed, "Finally an answer to a question I've asked myself all my life." While adding to the pressure I already feel tonight speaking to such a select group of people. Many invitees sent me articles and books about this topic. In fact, I received one only on Sunday. And one colleague of mine responded to my invitation saying, "Within the UK, I don't think the governments understand the possible long-term societal consequences of their economically and ideologically driven decisions. I wonder where we would be now if all these ancient Greek philosophers had been told society couldn't afford them to sit around all day talking, and that they should be studying and teaching applied olive harvesting instead." Yet a completely different reaction came from another invitee. Interesting question. My answer to it has probably changed, as my perspective has changed from that of a student to a taxpayer. Consensus might be a tall order, he said. Indeed. While we're looking at these two pictures of lectures taking place, the contrast could not be greater. On the left, we see Henricus Heinrich de Alemannia lecturing a small group of men in the 14th century, most likely in France, while on the right, we see a female lecturer from Monash University teaching a large number of male and female students. while Henricus lectures from the cathedra, which lends its name to the professorial chair, and he and his students study and read from books. The lecturer on the right uses modern technology, a computer switched on, the visualizer is available underneath the lectern, and the lecturer uses a modern mobile microphone, similar to mine tonight, in order to be heard by the many students. However, when we look closely at the painting on the left, we see students chatting with each other in the final row. And in the second row from the back, we can even discover a student being asleep. So maybe not that many things have changed since the 14th century. Now let us look at a further example of 14th century university life. The following is an exchange of letters between a father and his son who is studying at the University of Orléans. So the parent writes, "I have recently discovered that you live dissolutely and slothfully, preferring license to restraint and play to work and strumming a guitar, while the others are at their studies, whence it happens that you have read but one volume of law, while more industrious companions have read several." Now the son is responding and says, "We have good companions in the house with us, well advanced in their studies and of excellent habits. Wherefore, lest production should cease for lack of material, we beg your paternity to send us by the bearer money for the purchase of parchment, ink, and a desk, and the other things which we need in sufficient amount, that we may suffer no want on your account, God forbid, but finish our studies and return home with honor." So again, how much has changed? So clearly, while the parent thinks the son is wasting his life at university, not working hard enough, while drinking and playing music, the son is requesting more money from the family, allegedly for buying a desk and other study material in order to study hard and return home with a good degree. Now, my daughter has just gone off to university, she's here as well, and we communicate as well, mainly by text message, and I must admit that my messages are full of the word study, and hers are full of the word money. So let's say more than that. So what is a university? This is just a definition from an etymological dictionary. And when I'm presenting a short history of universities, I will actually use this definition, which is institution of higher learning. So tonight, I will aim to guide us through the origins of universities and present a short and select history, concentrating mainly on Europe, and really short and select. There will be lots of gaps in there. I will then comment on the changing shape and purpose of universities before attempting to answer the question of tonight's lecture, thereby also reflecting on models of management and governance. So, where do universities come from? Back to the ancient Greek philosophers. Many people would cite Plato's Academy or Aristotle's Lyceum. And the difference between the two philosophers is often shown by referring to this fresco by Raphael. It's called the School of Athens. It shows great philosophers, scientists, and mathematicians. Most importantly, it shows Plato and his student Aristotle in the center, with Plato pointing upwards towards heaven, and Aristotle pointing more downwards towards the earth. Both figures hold modern, or modern of the time, bound copies of their books in their left hands, while gesturing with their right. Plato is shown as an older man, a wise man, while Aristotle, who walks slightly ahead of him, is younger, but nevertheless mature. And it seems that the other young men in the picture, in the painting, are looking up to him. Now there's a popular interpretation of the hand gestures, and it attributes Plato's hand pointing upwards towards the cosmos to his theoretical views of ethics, while Aristotle's gesture of pointing downwards has been interpreted as demonstrating his emphasis on a practical purpose of ethics, rather than as knowledge for its own sake. However, Aristotle is in fact pointing at the world around him, which is not necessarily opposite to Plato's. Aristotle, who founded his school in 334 BC outside Athens, he would actually walk with his tutees through the woods in the mornings to discuss scientific and philosophical issues, which were then taught to a larger group in the evenings. And due to their activities being based mainly on walking and thinking and discussing, they were called peripatetics. So not a single applied olive harvesting degree in sight. So in a very simplistic way, are today's universities more in line with Aristotle's than with Plato's philosophy? So let us look at the world's oldest universities. Now, depending on the definition of university and depending whether we only want to count universities that are still in existence, the list varies. In addition, it is not always easy to find an undisputed founding date, with many universities changing shape over time or important documents or proof missing. It seems that the oldest degree-awarding institutions, though, are located in Europe, where the practice of granting certification was starting to become common in the 12th century. However, there are many institutions of higher learning in Asia and Africa, which are far older than European universities. And each book about the history of universities, and there are many, there are really many, they come up with a different list of oldest universities. But in many publications, the University of Cambridge makes it to number 10, so as the 10th oldest university. Cambridge, formed by Oxford scholars, is the second oldest university in the English-speaking world, and has consistently been ranked, as you know, at the top alongside Oxford. It has produced many Nobel laureates. But somewhere higher up, in about 6th position, we can find the University of Bologna. The University of Bologna is considered by most the first proper and still existing degree-awarding university in the world. The degrees awarded by Bologna, which is the bachelor's degree, the licentiate, the master's degree, and the doctorate, have been adopted throughout the world. The university has notable alumni, such as Dante Alighieri and Albrecht Dürer, and in more modern times, Pier Paolo Pasolini, while Umberto Eco, famous author, extremely erudite and prolific academic, and professor of semiotics, is the president of the Scuola Superiore di Studi Umanistici at the university. It is very special to me, as I studied there for my master's dissertation, and I have very fond memories of the university, its students, Umberto Eco, whose lecture on semiotics I attended, and the city of Bologna, to which I still return as often as I can. Now, many publications actually cite the University of Nalanda as the oldest university. The site of Nalanda is located in the Indian state of Bihar, which is about 55 miles south of Patna. Nalanda is one of the world's first residential universities and accommodated over 10,000 students and 2,000 teachers. It had 8 separate compounds, 10 temples, many meditation halls, classrooms, and a famous library. In the 12th century, Nalanda University was sacked by Turkish Muslim invaders, and this is seen by many as a major milestone in the decline of Buddhism in India. Earlier this year I was in India, and I read the Times of India, and actually the Times of India announced that the famous university is going to be reborn as Nalanda International University, with support from China, Japan, and Singapore. Gopal Sarabhal was appointed earlier this year as Vice-Chancellor, and it is hoped that the first courses are going to run again from 2013. So the oldest university will become, well, for a short time at least, probably a very short time, the youngest university in the world. I would now like to concentrate in Europe and offer a whistle-stop tour of the themes and developments by showing some highlights of modern European history, which are relevant to my answer of what are universities for. Well, I have to start with the Renaissance, because as Kia said, my PhD was in Italian Renaissance poetry, so I'm starting with the Renaissance. And with the Renaissance emerging in Italy in the 14th century, from Petrarch onwards, a new way of life flourished. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel, Castiglione wrote Il Cortegiano, the courtier, and proposed new forms of politeness. Universities taught the pure classical sources, the literae humaniores, and attracted the most distinguished scholars of the age. For example, Galileo. He lectured at the universities of Padua and Pisa. In Germany, on the other hand, Martin Luther taught theology at the Academy of Wittenberg, which became the first reformed university. He did indeed mistrust universities, viewing them as the stronghold of the papacy. The European academic world at that time was split among the various creeds. Indeed, many universities denied enrollment or graduation to anyone who did not fulfill certain religious requirements. Religion tried to impose itself on science, and Galileo's incarceration in 1632 after the publication of his dialogues in defense of the Copernican system is evidence of this. In the mid-17th century, a lot of change occurred, and student enrollments dropped in many countries. There are a number of reasons for this, such as economic decline, but one assumed reason is that the nobility left university lecture halls for other forms of education. The old University of Bologna also seemed to decline. An interesting fact is that the Archdeacon Antonio Felice Marsili, he claimed that there were too many lecturers and decided that the list of 150 lecturers should be cut down to about 12. So I wonder what staff would have to say about that nowadays. However, Oxford and Cambridge did manage to uphold their traditions, perhaps because the changes they endured were minimal. It's also interesting to note that this period of time, which saw the advancement of universities halted in many countries, also coincided with power struggles between church, state and academia, and saw frequent changes in governance. Indeed, it could perhaps be argued that the struggles and changes were perhaps the reasons for this apparent decline. In this time period, Europe also enjoyed a scientific revolution. However, this did not necessarily take place in universities. In Italy, for example, there were academies and informal circles of literati and scientists. The earliest was founded in Florence and sponsored by Lorenzo de' Medici. Then the famous Accademia della Crusca compiled a dictionary of the Tuscan dialect, which then became modern Italian. Another interesting fact is that this academy actually still exists nowadays, but the Berlusconi government, and you might know that Berlusconi just survived another confidence vote, the Berlusconi government is threatening to eliminate this academy as part of its aim to close any state-funded research organization that employs fewer than 70 people. Now, back in the late Renaissance, in Rome, the Accademia dei Lincei, of which Galileo was a member, tried to form a network of academies across Europe, but Galileo's imprisonment disrupted this plan. In England, however, the idea of forming academies to further the sciences fell on fertile ground. It was claimed that universities were unwilling to accommodate new learning, so an academy was apparently needed. In 1662, the Royal Society was formed, quote, for the glory of God and the benefit of mankind. Meanwhile, in France, the Académie des Sciences was founded in 1666, and these institutions would very much guide science later on in the 18th century. However, intellectual thinking did not only take place in academies and universities. An interesting example is that in the 18th century, London has 2,000 coffee places nicknamed penny universities. Everybody entering had to pay a penny, but then had access to as much coffee as desired. These were coffee houses, egalitarian meeting places, locations to think and philosophize, critical thinking ability sharpened by the use of coffee as a stimulant. The fascinating fact is that these penny universities were considered a danger to the monarchy, and King Charles II, in 1675, he issued a proclamation for the suppression of coffee houses, as these were seen as a social vice. However, he could not go through with it and back down 2 days before the proclamation was due to take effect. Such was the power of these thinking places, which assembled people from all levels of society, including universities. Coming back to the notion of governance and concluding this period in the history of universities, I would like to quote an academic, Mariano Pesce, who wrote, "The universities partly revived in the 18th century. Their governing bodies were transformed. The new sciences were absorbed and expanded upon. Monarchs saw it as their duty to support higher learning. They gave the universities new laws and endowed them with funds to improve lecturers' pay. The Enlightenment began." So are there lessons to be learned? Keywords characterizing this period are freedom of thought, Immanuel Kant's motto, sapere aude, meaning dare to know, and the expression of new learning. In France, huge changes occurred in 1789 when the French National Assembly proclaimed the sovereignty of the people and the rights of man and the citizen. As a result, old political structures of monarchy, nobility, and church lost their privileges and wealth, and universities were regarded as part of the Ancien Régime. École Polytechnique to train engineers, and École Normale for teachers were founded. Meanwhile, in Germany, Wilhelm von Humboldt founded the University of Berlin in 1810, following the vision of Kant. So modern Europe therefore witnessed two models, the teaching-based and perhaps more bureaucratic French, and the more research-inspired German scheme. Against the traditional notion that the purpose of the university was to train professionals, the New Berlin model sought to form scientists, and the key word of the Humboldtian movement was Lehrfreiheit, or academic freedom. The Humboldtian University was keen to educate only a small elite. However, it is important to point out that the excellent reputation of 19th century German universities was built on the outstanding standards achieved by schooling. So it was Pestalozzi's pedagogy, with its main goal to build children's character and to teach people to think for themselves, that reformed primary and secondary education, and they could provide well-educated students to universities. The principle of Bildung, formation, with its importance of critical appropriation of knowledge, was encouraged. The idea eventually became the dominant model elsewhere. John Henry Cardinal Newman, and you can't go to any lecture about university without citing Newman, so he wrote in his famous book about the university, he says, a university in its simple and rudimental form is a school of knowledge of every kind, consisting of teachers and learners from every quarter. He goes on to state, it is the place to which 1,000 schools make contributions, in which the intellect may safely range and speculate, sure to find its equal in some antagonist activity, and its judge in the tribunal of truth. It is a place where inquiry is pushed forward, and discoveries verified and perfected, and rashness rendered innocuous, and error exposed, by the collision of mind with mind, and knowledge with knowledge. This quest of knowledge, mostly of the elite, developed into a system whereby education was the preserve for the social elite. But let's now move forward, fast forward, to modern times. So, looking at the last photo, you will see that there are rather a lot of students. In fact, the photo is of Bochum University in Germany, with its auditorium maximum seating 1,906 students. In contrast to this, one of the biggest lecture theatres in Edinburgh is the George Square Lecture Theatre, with a capacity of 481, while this lecture theatre tonight seats 300 students, or 300 people. So going back to the University of Bologna, it is worth mentioning that the university now has 100,000 students, quite a lot bigger than the University of Edinburgh. I'm looking at Sir Tim here. Mass education. So this is the front cover of Der Spiegel from 1988. Der Spiegel is a weekly German magazine which could perhaps be compared to The Economist, and which has been often at the forefront of German political and cultural thinking. The photo shows many students crammed into a frame, symbolizing ancient and elitist universities, and thereby depicting the lack of fitness for the purpose of mass education, with many universities having been conceived and built during the Humboldtian era. Students are überzählig, überdrüssig, and überflüssig, roughly translated numerous, weary, and superfluous. Now, at my own alma mater, the University of Münster, it was normal for me and my fellow students to sit on the floor in the corridor of the university, trying to catch the odd word of the lecturer in the lecture theatre, where all seats had been taken, including those on the windowsills and on the floor. Yet we did not complain. Instead, we were angry with ourselves for not having arrived at least an hour earlier so that we could catch a seat in the lecture theatre. Student expectations were so low that we did not think anything about having to stand in a queue along the corridor of our eminent professor, waiting patiently for over 2 hours to see him or her for 2 minutes in order to agree the title for our coursework. Of course, our professors only had office hours once a week, emails did not exist, and we had to sign up for a slot weeks in advance if the list on the door filled up very, very quickly. So what have been the changes in the UK that led to so-called mass education? In the post-war period, higher education has been reviewed numerous times. These reviews included the Rollins Report of 1963, which led to the creation of what are now the new universities, and the Deering Report of 1997, which defined, or rather redefined, the purpose of higher education and recommended that students should pay around 25% of the cost of their tuition. In Scotland, during this time, the participation rate at universities rose from 3% to nearly 50%, and the number of universities increased from 4 to 15. Growing divergence in higher education policy occurred following devolution, with consequences for student finances and the introduction of the graduate endowment tax, subsequent to recommendations from the Pewley Committee in 1999. Nowadays, the SNP's paper on the future of higher education, spending review guidance, and various reports from University Scotland point to a different approach towards higher education than in England, Wales, or Northern Ireland. However, let's go back to the UK as a whole first, where until the 1980s, university expansion happened alongside the rest of Europe. Nevertheless, student-staff ratios never matched those of universities in continental Europe. And when I came over to the UK to lecture in languages and literature, my seminar groups consisted typically of 25 students, while I myself had been taught in seminars of over 100. Clearly, the evolution of universities needs to be seen in the context within which universities used to be the preserve of social elites and had financial freedom that supported their independence. The independence can also be seen to have been supported by the establishment of what are called synergistic systems of self-governance that were compatible with the intellectual and philosophical values on which it was based. Thereby, the university's evolution occurred within an environment that was supportive of the prioritization of these internal underlying values. So could these values survive? And if they do, are they compatible with more directive systems of governance? Recent decades have seen these sources of litigation decline, and since the 1990s, new governance has been central to discussions across Europe. In response to a more utilitarian view of higher education, in most European countries, there has been a shift in recent years from detailed state control towards external guidance by different stakeholders. Decreasing funding from the state, coupled with changing funding models and an uncertain outlook due to new governments and higher education reviews, means that universities in the UK are becoming more reliant on increasing income from other sources and on implementing saving measures within their remits. Depending on government targets, ring-fenced funds are released to which universities are either entitled to on a pre-allocated and formulaic basis, or for which they can apply on a competitive basis. If universities therefore want to increase their income base in the latter way, allegiance with government agendas follows. In addition, the introduction of student fees in 1998, top-up fees in 2006 or 7, the introduction of fees up to 9,000 in England following the Brown Review of 2010 has changed the notion of free education to that of a more customer-led expectational model. Thus, the increasingly autonomous university becomes, paradoxically, more dependent on government agendas. In contrast to Germany and France, for example, where until recently governance structures, academic careers, and roles had to comply largely with the preset remit, the UK nowadays has greater freedom to structure its senior teams, its committee structure, and its decision-making bodies. While in many countries in continental Europe, senior and middle managers are elected for a certain period, enjoying a modest additional allowance, and really a modest additional allowance, for their efforts, most universities in the UK have appointed managers who can profit from an enhanced salary, which is more often than not competitive with the private industry, and increasing the topic of criticism from various quarters, including government, and the Scotsman today, for those of you who have seen the article. It is interesting to note, though, that many countries in Europe are trying to emulate the UK system in the hope of reducing wastage, creating greater accountability, and professionalizing senior roles, such as deans, pro-vice-chancellors, and vice-chancellors. So the question needs to be asked whether the effect of the developments described can undermine conditions for collegial decision-making. So if in the past the democratic and representative university senate, or equivalent, was the overarching academic body determining the future of the university, has this been replaced with a governance structure which mirrors the private sector's move towards unitary parliament and away from pluralistic decision-making? Lord Glassman, or Maurice Glassman, his reader in political theory, he became one of Ed Miliband's gurus, and he was made a lord in November last year. Now, he does not shy away from controversial comments. He is neither in the House of Lords nor privately. Now, he said about joining London Metropolitan University in 1995, now that's his quote, he said, "That was a hugely radicalizing thing for me. I experienced the managerial authoritarianism of public sector reforms. Departments were abolished. I was told what to do by people who had no idea what they were doing. A shelf-stacker waitress has more power in the corporate governance of the firm than I do at London Met." Now here in Scotland, we are undergoing a review of university governance, chaired by my colleague Ferdinand von Tanzinski, principal for the Gordon University. The panel is looking at evidence from other countries. It is interesting to note, though, that at a time where other countries are looking at the UK for guidance, we in Scotland are possibly changing our governance structures. In Germany, for example, where Vice-Chancellors are still elected by Senate and by the Board of Governors, more and more Länder, states, such as North Rhine-Westphalia, have recently moved closer to the UK model, by making the chair of governors the line manager to the vice-chancellor, including negotiating salaries with them. An interesting development is the recent introduction of student fees in Germany, and subsequently the step-by-step abolition of them in North Rhine-Westphalia, Baden-Württemberg and Saarland, mostly following the election of new governments. In this context, though, it's important to note that Germany has increased its funding for universities, and that up to 80% of German universities' funding comes from the state, 80%. In 2008, a major study of European governance reform was commissioned by the Director General for Education and Culture of the European Commission. The subsequent publication covered case studies of 32 countries. Comparing the two countries I know most about, Germany and the UK, the report found that in recent years in the UK state regulation, academic self-governance and managerial governance have all stayed the same, while competition and stakeholder guidance have increased. In Germany, competition has increased dramatically, but the starting point was a lot lower than here, in particular between the states in Germany, and stakeholder guidance has also gone up. However, in contrast to the UK, state regulation has gone down, and while managerial governance has increased, academic self-governance has consequently decreased. This study points towards 5 major recommendations and outcomes. The first one is, European universities should be granted more institutional autonomy. In particular, this concerns more leeway for determining their own internal governance structures. That's the first recommendation. The second one, the balance between autonomy and accountability needs to be revisited. Particularly in the UK, universities often have to pay for their great autonomy by what are felt to be excessive accountability requirements in reporting back and being audited by a series of bodies. The third recommendation is investment into higher education and research needs to increase. We all like to hear that. It is claimed that without increased investment, universities will be less likely to fulfill growing expectations of their role within the European knowledge society and will become less competitive. It's interesting to note that the report states that only governance reforms in combination with sufficient levels of funding are likely to contribute to enhanced performances. Fourth point, greater realism is needed in the context of expectations that governance reforms will result in rapid effects. It is stated very clearly in the report that only institutional autonomy in combination with funding reforms will contribute to system performance. And finally, they recommend a European monitoring system. However, it's a monitoring system not to create more bureaucracy for us, but it's to help us to facilitate analysis of different systems so that we can compare ourselves. So perhaps the governance review, having been set up here in Scotland, should take account of these 5 points, in particular as one of its remits is to look to other countries and learn from them. So clearly these recommendations have to be seen in the context of what universities are for. What have we learned from the past, and is the past still relevant in these ever-changing times? As mentioned right at the beginning of my lecture, there are numerous academics, philosophers, politicians, fellow Vice-Chancellors and many others who have deliberated the purpose of universities. Whole books are dedicated to the topic, with often a title giving away the opinion of the authors, such as the book entitled Education's End, Why Our Colleges and Universities Have Given Up on the Meaning of Life. Written by Kronman, he's an American professor of law at Yale University. Back in the UK, many presidents of Universities UK have spoken about the purposes of universities. Ivor Crewe, who was the previous president of the UK, he gave a seminar at 11 Downing Street in 2003 in response to the white paper then. And he stated, what are universities for? Same title again. What are universities for? Let's not lose sight of first principles. Quite simply, the unfettered pursuit of truth and excellence through scholarship, research and teaching. I can stop now. So if we look at important inventions and discoveries coming out of universities, many of them were not planned. Major discoveries have not been shaped by government directives or the interests of specific stakeholders. For example, the invention of DNA fingerprinting more than 25 years ago was a complete coincidence and the result of the University of Leicester having invested heavily in buying the Professor Alan Jeffreys, who then lectured at the University of Amsterdam, and a complete research team in 1977. By sheer coincidence, 7 years later, Professor Jeffreys stumbled across the uniqueness of DNA genetics. And this groundbreaking discovery has shaped forensic sciences across the world, but was the result of the University of Leicester having the money and the foresight to invest in excellent genetics academics, but without any hint of funders, public or private, seeking an instrumental outcome or an impact for the next research excellence framework. In other words, it is possible for a university to have positive outcomes for society and the economy without this having been planned or dictated by relevant stakeholders. Indeed, it could be argued that this major invention was actually due to the lack of intervention or steer from external stakeholders, and that directed research is perhaps a poor predictor for discoveries. We know from this brief historical overview that universities have changed drastically over the centuries, mainly due to the actions of different powers, be they the church, the monarchy, the wealthy, or the influential. In the last decades, universities have changed in size and constituency. Have they therefore changed in purpose? Well, the answer is yes. Is this desirable? Well, the answer is not always. In an era of globalization and financial retrenchment, it is tempting to agree with the chief scientist of Australia, who sees, quote, the potential of universities to play a central role as dynamos of growth in the innovation process and be huge generators of wealth creation. However, the answer is not that simple. In Scotland, recent contributions from the Royal Society of Edinburgh, for example, the talk by Lord Sutherland, also entitled What Are Universities For? And the most recent Hume occasional paper series dealing with higher education in Scotland, with contributions from some of my colleagues who are here tonight, they attempt to answer this question. The latter publication looks at the role of universities from different perspectives. The Economist's view, thoughts from principals, comments from informed parties, and views from outside Scotland. The publication serves the purpose of stimulating debate rather than offering one answer, and therefore the foreword merely summarizes the various viewpoints expressed by the authors and states in its conclusion, we see the need for objective, informed and evidence-based debate, and we hope that these essays will go some way to stimulating such a debate and to finding the distinctive Scottish solution that is required. So yet another call for a debate. For me, the various functions of universities can be summarized below the following headings. So these are my headings. But the question needs to be asked, to what end and why? Taking the topics in turn, I start by addressing education. Are universities there to provide trained personnel or liberal education? The UK took the decision many years ago to offer more vocational courses at degree level, partly through the introduction of polytechnics, but also later by awarding university status to polytechnics. Although polys offered many vocational courses, they also offered more traditional liberal arts courses. Nevertheless, many universities, both old and new, nowadays offer some vocational courses, which in other countries are offered in partnership between industry and perhaps the equivalent of further education colleges. In Germany, for example, the notion of apprenticeships is still alive and well. The popularity of apprenticeships there is due to the so-called dual education system, where half of the week is spent in industry and half back in school, continuing learning core subjects such as modern languages. A well-qualified former apprentice can earn as much as a graduate, is qualified to the same status as others in the same discipline, and belongs to a well-respected guild. So one of the reasons why the introduction of university fees has had a rough ride in Germany is the fact that the difference in salaries between a graduate and a non-graduate is substantially smaller than in the UK. However, this is all history, and in the UK now our universities offer a wide range of courses, and we work in partnership with industry in order to keep up to date. Are we supposed to provide ready-made products for future employers? Well, the answer for me has to be a no. What we deliver are people with intellectual and practical skills, with personal and social responsibilities, people who can integrate and apply learning critically, and people who have broad knowledge of human cultures and the world around us. As I sit on the joint SDS-SFC Skills Committee, Scottish Funding Council Committee, I often hear employers lament the lack of preparedness of graduates for the job they're entering. However, it is also the role and duty of employers to provide further job-specific training. Well, having said that, it's clearly easier for large, wealthy companies to provide a training program. And a recent presentation by a German higher education partnership manager from Siemens here in Edinburgh at an employability conference showed this commitment. However, the majority of businesses in Scotland are not the size of Siemens, and many are family businesses. In fact, at Queen Margaret University, we work with the Scottish Family Business Association. We bring together smaller businesses. So by pooling the needs of smaller businesses, much can be done to provide upskilling for employees. It cannot be the role of universities to provide perfect candidates for each job, but it is our role to work in partnership with industry in order for us to learn from each other. In addition, employers bemoan the lack of literacy, numeracy, and collaborative and problem-solving skills in graduates. Again, we need to ask ourselves whether many of these skills should not have been acquired prior to starting a university degree. And perhaps the introduction of the Curriculum for Excellence here in Scotland should help to address many of these perceived shortcomings. Under this category, I would like to sum up by using two quotes. One is from Cardinal Newman again, But he said, "The man who has learned to think and to reason and to compare and to discriminate and to analyze, who has refined his taste and formed his judgment and sharpened his mental vision, will not indeed at once be a lawyer or a pleader or an orator or a statesman or a physician, or an engineer or a chemist or a geologist or an antiquarian, but he will be placed in that state of intellect in which he can take up any one of the sciences or callings I have referred to, with an ease, a grace, a versatility, and a success to which another is a stranger." The second quote is from Stephen Schwartz. He's currently Vice-Chancellor at Macquarie University in Sydney. And he said, "Yes, we must prepare graduates for what they will do, but we also have a duty to help them at least to think about what kind of people they want to be." Let us now turn to the role of research. The question needs to be asked whether the purpose of research is to increase human knowledge per se, and whether there is an intrinsic value in research, assuming that ensuing potential benefits are unpredictable. Or should research be directed towards economic and social benefits? In addition, there is clearly also research that academics are engaged in, which informs and influences what they are teaching, and indeed how they are teaching. But going back to my short historic overview, it was actually the Prussian Minister of Education, Wilhelm von Humboldt, who introduced a number of reforms influencing higher education. His idea was that the university is not just a training place for clergy, doctors and lawyers, but an institution where the prime activity was research. All these types of research, in my opinion, do not contradict each other, and they are not mutually exclusive. As my colleagues at QMUNO, who are here tonight, are very fond of triangles in trying to depict various concepts, although the following triangle is something that was conceptualized by a colleague of mine first. So if we take, for example, the academic discipline of engineering, every lecturer should be engaged in research and scholarship in his or own field of engineering to inform teaching, and this would be the bottom shape. And this form of scholarship can become research with wide-ranging impact, but not all academics might be engaged in it. But this type of research can, for example, inform government about which renewable energies to concentrate on in Scotland in order to become a sustainable, independent country. So that would be the middle shape. So however, pure research into environmental engineering could also lead to exciting discoveries and inventions of, let's say, and I'm inventing this really, hybrid water energy mills. Well, they don't exist yet, do they? Powerful enough to provide energy to the whole of Scotland with enough left to export far afield. However, the error is coming. All academics work in the same field of engineering, and there's flexibility and porosity between the different levels. Hence, there does not need to be a choice between one and the other. So therefore, I strongly believe that research should be encouraged, supported, and funded wherever it is found. Universities need to demonstrate public engagement, my third bullet point, which is closely connected to my final point of universities being agents of social mobility. Universities need to be part of the civil society. They are prominently located within a region, town, or city. We employ regional staff, and many graduates continue working in their vicinity. They recruit students not only internationally and nationally, but also locally. They work with charities, public bodies, and health organizations. They engage in research relevant to society's needs. Most importantly, they provide a rich infrastructure with premises many externals can profit from. They are seen as public bodies themselves and employ academics, many of whom are public intellectuals. Universities engage with creative and cultural bodies. Although financially not necessarily an incentive, public engagement is simply our duty because of what we are. Economic development. It's something all of us are engaged in. On the one hand, as major employers and recruiters of students who support the local economy whilst at university, we contribute billions of pounds every year to Scotland's economy. According to a 2010 study by Bigger Economics, Scottish universities generate 6.2 billion in gross value added, which is 6% of Scotland's total GDA. They generate 149,000 full-time equivalent jobs, which translates as 7% of the entire Scottish workforce. £500 million per annum is competitively won for research, and the same amount again is income to Scotland from fee-paying international students. Universities transfer over £300 million per annum of costed expertise to business as we engage in a more targeted way because of our subject disciplines, our knowledge exchange, and our research. Universities are at the core of Scotland's success in areas including renewable energy, life sciences, and creative industries. We are also at the heart of Scotland's successful cities. Let's take the example of the highly successful MIT in the States, which has led the world with scientific innovations. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that one of my heroes lectures there. This hero is Noam Chomsky, the world's foremost linguist and anti-war activist. It's quite ironic that Chomsky works at an organization that has been very much funded by the Pentagon. However, the reason why he likes it is, he said, I was just left alone to my own devices. Other people took days off to run their businesses. I went off as an anti-war activist. But no one ever objected. MIT is a very free and open place. So I'm not recommending here that we're letting people go. So this is why I'm giving you a second quote here. That's the Professor of Technological Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Ed Roberts, who's also at MIT. He attributes MIT's success to its leadership. And he says, when all those people sign up to a mission to forward entrepreneurship, you have a dramatically bigger impact. In MIT, people are encouraged not just to think bold, but to do it boldly. If you come up with a brilliant idea, that's okay. If you win a Nobel Prize for your research, that's fine. But if you take this idea and apply it and make something transformative happen, then at MIT that's deeply admired. Well, clearly we are not all in the business of employing Nobel Prize academics, but we are all involved in knowledge exchange, business startups, spin-out companies, and we do all of this to the strengths and the expertise of our own institutions. Now, what is closest to my heart is the notion of universities being agents of social mobility and inclusion. My brother and I are the first generation in my family to go to university. So when I went to primary school, so no professorial lecture is complete without a presenter in a photo as a child, so there it is. That was my first day going to primary school. What I'm holding is a cone full of sweets, and that's still a tradition nowadays in Germany. So when you go to school, your first day is sweetened by this, so that it's not that bad. So when I went to primary school, it was not expected of me to go on to a better secondary school. And being a rather shy and quiet girl, I certainly did not shine at primary school. When, by the way, my childhood was not completely determined by serious schooling. So I must admit the guy in the foreground steals the show a bit, so I'm the one behind. So if it had not been for my primary school teacher who saw something in me and who convinced my parents that I should go on to grammar school, I would not be where I am now. In the UK there are universities such as the University of East London, London South Bank University and London Metropolitan University who see it as the first and foremost aim to make a difference and to transform people's lives, just quoting from some of their mission statements. Unfortunately, these universities are also at the bottom of our league tables, as indicators such as student retention, employability, number of good degrees, student satisfaction, etc. all influence their ranking. Having worked myself at the University of North London, which later became London Metropolitan University, I know what wonderful work the university is engaged in, despite all the negative press it receives. London Met students from black and minority ethnic community outnumber BME students in all Russell Group universities taken together. Excellent research has been going on, perhaps not to the same quantity as in Russell Group universities, but the quality has certainly been comparable. And most of all, at every single graduation ceremony, I've been deeply moved seeing these graduates going across the stage to the loud cheers of their families and friends from all kinds of backgrounds, having achieved a degree despite all odds, and in some cases after many years switching between full-time and part-time mode depending on their family or outside work commitments and the financial circumstances. So the so-called value added that these universities can offer is admirable. Therefore, I see it as an undisputable duty of universities to engage in outreach activities, to reach out to those who would not have thought of going to university, but who have the potential to do so. Not only does it change people's lives, but it also improves the country's workforce and helps address potential skills gaps. However, this role goes along with the duty of universities to invest in good teaching and support to prevent students from dropping out and to prepare them for a successful career. This does not come cheap, though. Reaching out to people, be it by engaging with the local community or underperforming schools, is not the only role of universities in this context. I firmly believe that universities' research activities can contribute or make them leaders of social change. Research, such as that on educational attainment of children from deprived background at the Institute of Education in London, or indeed the research at Queen Margaret University in Public Health and Development, all contribute to a better society. The third aspect of work universities undertake to shape the social agenda is work not always central to the teaching and research agendas, but nonetheless central to their work. These are activities connected to the previous aspect of public engagement or even economic development. Let me give you one example for this. Queen Margaret University leads, alongside the Open University in Scotland, a third sector internship program supported by the Scottish Funding Council. Across Scotland, we help students in charitable organisations for paid internships. So not only do we improve student CVs, with these experiences, we help charities through offering them additional workforce, which they otherwise could not have afforded. But most importantly, these internships are set up to help charities in a sustainable way once the money stream has run out. And what more, In our students, these internships hopefully encourage personal and social responsibility, as we as universities have the role of encouraging civic engagement both in local and in global communities. Therefore, and to sum up here, a major role for university is to effect positive social change, indeed to lead on positive change through our outreach activities, our relevant research, and our support and other engagement activities. If not universities, who or which organizations have this powerful mix of expertise and infrastructure to achieve progress in social justice? Can all universities fulfill all of these functions? The answer is yes, they can, but not to the same extent. This is why we'll add a sixth role for every university, and that is to maintain and or rebalance the diversity of functions within a university to define its unique mission and vision. We need to examine and analyze how much of what we can afford to engage in. However, right from the start, I would like to emphasize that I do not believe in further stratification of the university system, leading to research-intensive and teaching-only universities. This is in contrast to the thinking of many. For example, Anthony Seldon, in his Sir John Cassis Foundation lecture in 2010, he stated, "In trying to achieve everything, universities are in danger of achieving nothing." He goes on to say, universities have far too many functions thrust upon them, and in trying to be all things to all people, universities are ending up as satisfying to a few. His way forward is, he says, the sector needs to be split up. This could entail entirely separate universities. In fact, close to home, notes produced for a successful debate following talks by Lord Sutherland and Sir Colin Lucas at the Royal Society of Edinburgh, the notes state, "Such is the diversity of demand and function that no one institution can efficiently fulfill them all." Although the notes agree that Scottish universities need to satisfy diversity of demands, and that institutional diversity is an important attribute of an effective higher education system, it goes on to say, "It is arguably important that Scotland's university act as parts of a system whose cumulative capacity responds to a variety of the needs of society." Being part of a system clearly points to a greater overview, in fact, direction from government, which challenges the autonomy and independence of individual universities. Well, universities' histories and their funding have shaped their particular makeup, but I would argue that it is possible, indeed desirable, to strive for a well-balanced combination of all those functions mentioned in order to offer a good quality product. Teaching needs to be informed by scholarship. Lecturers actively engage in research, they will transmit their enthusiasm for their research to their students. Institutions with less research funding and financial and other pressures would be able to try and align as much as possible research expertise with their academic offer. Even more so, it is often possible to align all of these aforementioned functions of a university to a certain extent, thereby offering flexibility and porosity, with staff and students profiting from a well-thought-out, clearly outlined, distinctive purpose and vision. It is the balance of these functions and their interrelatedness that define a university's direction. In my opinion, a university that decides to or is forced to fulfill only one or the other role ceases being a university. When it comes to funding universities, according to me, therefore, it has perhaps been a mistake trying to separate the interrelated activities of teaching, research, knowledge transfer, etc., as funding one activity more than the other is at the expense of the other. A fair and successful system preserves adequate funding for all interrelated activities at all universities. Only this way can they develop positively and proactively specialist missions without being forced into certain functions. Universities need to exist both for private benefit and the public good, and only through engaging in all of the outlined 5 functions does a university fulfill its duties. However, it's through its 6th function that a university becomes successful by defining itself. How do we run these animals then? Well, the mass expansion of higher education last century against the background of still pertaining values more akin to small elitist universities opened up conflicts at all kinds of levels. Changes introduced, in particular through the last century, were often steps in the right and appropriate direction, but sometimes out of sync with existing or developing values and intellectual thinking. Is it therefore possible nowadays to run a university in a way that is in tune with the notion of a democratic and autonomous university? As perhaps my lecture tonight has shown, my response to this is to learn from the past and to pick the most successful bits. Our universities nowadays are both a means to an end, whilst continuing being an end in itself. As such, we have to be responsive to society's needs. Funding from the state and increasingly funding from the students themselves, they attribute a responsibility to us that we cannot and should not deny. So when it comes to running a university, we must therefore acknowledge our stakeholders. However, do students, for example, always know best? At one of my previous universities, I chaired a 5-year research project following 1,500 students through 3 years of their degree into the first 2 years of their new job. While at university, the students complained bitterly about their student experience, lamenting irrelevant lectures, lack of support, etc. But a year into their work, the very same students could not rave enough about their university experience, describing their 3 years at the institution as the best and most relevant learning experience they had ever encountered. Therefore, relatively new accountabilities and ensuing bureaucracy, such as student satisfaction surveys, the publication of key information statistics, put on us might be welcome, but are not necessarily making us into universities serving society in a better way. However, it is the actual debate between staff, students, managers, and stakeholders that lead to productive decisions and the right vision for a university. These discussions can come very close to collective decision-making, but could be, in the least, the incentive for transparent consultation. They can take place in all kinds of fora, and space needs to be created for debate to take place. Too often, bodies such as Senate are filled up with bureaucratic agenda items, leaving no time or even energy to debate what the university should be about. In times of financial retrenchment, difficult decisions need to be taken. When this entails the reduction of staffing, it is very rare, in my view, to arrive at an outcome that hits the financial target by collective decision-making or even consensus. However, by proper consultation, transparent information, and negotiation, one can come up with a way forward that is, at the very least, understood by all and hopefully respected by many. The times of plenty are over, and therefore good managers are needed who are also good leaders. Whether they can be found by election is debatable. The university court, with experts representing the university stakeholders with relevant expertise, is a good way to run a university. It is not the system, but the people which can let universities down. At Queen Margaret University, court has an active interest in what goes on further down the food chain, and court members, for example, welcome to visit Senate and even attend lectures. So, is there still space for blue sky research and independent intellectual thinking? Yes, there is, and it needs to be maintained, but it is increasingly becoming difficult, and the question needs to be asked whether some of this will take place outside the existing state university sector. Will there be a resurgence of academies, or research institutes, or will private universities fulfill this niche, or even coffee houses? I think the market, including the recent fee-setting exercise for students from the rest of the UK, will influence further developments in this respect, and time will tell. However, it is the current potent mix of universities' multifaceted functions and the way these are inseparable from each other that make them leaders for a better society. I hope and expect that the outcome of the consultation of the Scottish Government's proposals for reform of post-16 education will be an affirmation of the diverse contributions which every university makes to building the sort of nation we all want to live in. So, I would like to end this talk by coming back to Plato and Aristotle. These great intellectuals never had a sip of coffee to stimulate them, and if you want to know, the first coffee beans were cultivated in Yemen around 575 AD. And by the way, the aforementioned Kant did refuse to drink any coffee. However, all these people did shape what we understand as higher learning and critical thinking. So coming back to my initial question, whether our universities are more like Plato's School of Athens or more like Aristotle's Lyceum, for me, there is no contradiction. Universities are and need to be both. They need to search for truth and meaning, but they also need to connect to the world around us and engage intellectually with society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petra. Good evening, I'm Alan Galore and I'm the Vice Principal Academic at Queen Margaret University. It's my privilege to host the question and answer session. Well, I've learned ever such a lot because I thought universities were simply places for the dazed and bewildered to hide. And that's just the staff that I was talking about. So there's some serious, challenging questions that have been raised. Who would like to ask the first question? There are roving mics, and there are also some mics on the banisters if you are close to the edge of an aisle. Raise your hand and I shall send a microphone to you. Robin Parker, who is... Robin, could you just go to the microphone that is on the banister, and if you push the yellow button.
I thought that was on the subject of governance. No surprise perhaps I asked about that. And I thought one of the questions that springs to mind for me out of your sort of the questions you raised was really around the question of who universities should be accountable to, and given that they play both this really important role in terms of the local communities, in terms of wider society, but also that kind of blue skies thinking that needs to take place.
Mm-hmm. Robin is president of NUS Scotland, for those who do not know, and we were both quoted in Scotsman today as well about governance, which was quite interesting. Accountability is a huge issue, and clearly we need to be accountable. But I think we need first to see how our system is really working. I'm absolutely confident that the group that you are sitting on, the panel that looks at governance of Scottish universities, will come up with the right answer. The time is right for a review, but we need to look at other systems across Europe as well to see what works well and what does not work well. We just know from Europe that, for example, elective principles, it is not the answer. Because they're, in terms of accountability, in terms of wastage of money, it is not working. So I welcome the outcome of the review, and I hope that your panel is also looking at the European research evidence as well. I think I forwarded it to your group as well.
Thank you. Thomas Ward. In the days when Adam Smith was lecturing to his students at the University of Glasgow, accountability was extremely clear because the students at the start of one of his courses had to turn up with their cash to pay him before they were entitled to attend. No confusion there about who's responsible for what. Do you think perhaps in Scotland, as a serious question, we may benefit now from having a slightly larger private university sector?
It's a difficult answer because whether we benefit from, I don't know, there certainly will be changes because we are going to have different types of students. We have international students who pay a certain amount of fees. We have Scottish students who do not pay any fees. We have European students at the moment who at the moment do not pay any fees, but who might pay the administration fees. And we will have our UK students and the rest of UK students from England, Northern Ireland and Wales who will pay fees. So we have already 4 different groups in universities, and because of money being involved, I'm sure that in terms of stakeholder expectations, they will grow. What that means for the universities, that's a different matter. And we already engaged, as you know, in student satisfaction surveys. We are trying to support students every which way we can. We are trying to listen to our students. But when money does exchange hands, expectations do rise. In England, for example, and there are discussions in Scotland at the moment as well, in England, for example, universities have started to come up with student charters, whereby universities and students sign contracts in terms of what they can expect from each other. However, I personally think that's not the right way forward. But this was one of the answers in England to the introduction of the higher fees. It's not an answer, so we have to wait and see a bit, but certainly the situation will change.
Okay, we have a question from Sir Tim O'Shea and then Sarah Roger Knox up here.
Well, Petra, thank you for a really elegant lecture. I enjoyed it very much. I really liked the history last week. I really liked the beginning and the end. I guess a little comment and then a question. The little comment is I do think Cardinal Newman is greatly overrated.
What's overrated?
Overrated.
What is overrated? Sorry.
Cardinal Newman. If you read the book carefully, it's mostly preoccupied with getting Catholic gentlemen sorted, and if you look at the institution he's founded, it's all right. It's not stellar. On the other hand, if you look at Humboldt, then I think Humboldt is a major star. He didn't just reorganise German universities; he gave us the doctrine in its modern form. And that leads me to a question which is difficult for somebody like yourself or myself who's got a German background, which is, if you looked at them in the late 19th century, it would be very clear the best universities in the world were the German ones. They were doing fantastically well. The US wanted to emulate the Germans. In the UK, we came to the same position a bit later. Now, if you look where we are, well, if you just take Scotland, and you look at any of the World League table, Scotland, with a population of about 6% of Germany, actually does better. The Scottish universities do better than the German universities. I'm on the Strategy Commission of the Excellence Initiative, which is the German initiative to try to get the German universities into the place where they can see the British universities. So there is, it seems very clear that we are in a position with better universities, and I guess for me, part of the reason is the autonomy, and you argue that very carefully, and you can see the Germans very self-consciously trying to go for the governance models that we have. Another part of the reason it strikes me is something you didn't mention in much detail, which is the research assessment exercise, or the REF. Now that is quite a brutal instrument, as it's been applied in Britain, although not as actually as brutal as the Excellence Initiative. But it seems to me that has really sharpened up the research base in Britain over the last 25 years in an extraordinary way. And so the question is, why are the Scottish universities so much better than the German universities? And how much is it to do with a better governance model? How much is it to do with sharper research evaluation? And what other things are there that gives us outcome to this?
I think there are lots of reasons for that. I agree with you that the Scottish universities are a lot better than German universities. There's no doubt nowadays. One of the reasons is the mass education. As I said before, when you saw the pictures of Bournemouth University, this kind of education does not exist in Scotland. You don't teach to all these people. You don't stand in corridors queuing up. I think my daughter goes to the university now. I think her seminar group is 40, which is already quite high for an old university, but nevertheless it's a lot smaller than anything I've gone through. And that is still going on in Germany. So if you have mass education like that, you simply cannot provide the education that we can provide here. Governance is definitely the second one as well. The way that governance works in Scotland, or in the UK as a whole, I think does make us very accountable. The way that I have to stand up or sit in front of court, my court, they do ask challenging questions. I'm looking at some of them, I hope they're nodding. So I do feel definitely challenged. I feel that I need to prepare for these meetings. I feel obliged to deliver a good service to the students, and I'm then criticized and looked at by the court. So that is a system, again, that in Germany is starting to come in, because they're looking at the UK for inspirations. Autonomy. German universities feel they are autonomous, but they are not. They get up to 80% of funding from the state. An example was a polytechnic in Bochum as well. They got money from the state to build a brand new building, which is great, because we in Scotland, in the UK, we have to find our own money to come up with new buildings. So they get the money from the state. But did they have any influence on what the building looked like? No. The university principal was one of 20 people on the committee that could decide what the future building looked like. We at Queen Margaret University, we had students and staff, everybody involved in how this new building looked like. So it is not an autonomous university in Germany. It looks autonomous and the funding looks great, but the way government structures work, it does hinder progress in the right direction. Research Excellence Framework, yes, we all moan about it, but yes, it has sharpened our mind, there's no doubt about it, and the Excellence Initiative in Germany does exactly that, slightly later than all the developments here in the UK. So I agree.
Gentleman here, Roger. No.
Petra, there is a consensus, I suppose, that at the moment the sum total of human knowledge doubles every 4 years. Now, whether it's as exponential as that, or indeed whether it's knowledge or simply information, I think the problem's probably very similar. But I really wonder, given that slightly frightening statistic, what the role of the university should be in harnessing this in terms of management of this huge knowledge expansion and the exploitation of it, you know, with regard to your 5 bullet points.
Well, it's mind-boggling. So I didn't know about that statistic, but obviously knew about the vast expansion of it. It is absolutely mind-boggling. Who was the rector of St Andrews University said accumulation of knowledge and so on, that's the role of universities. I think it's becoming a little bit difficult nowadays to say that it is, but clearly with the technology that is enhanced as well, a lot can be done. We can archive a lot in an electronic form as well, which can be accessed by people whenever they want to, in a different way to what we are used to, so it doesn't have to be a lecture or seminar. So technology can help us a great way achieving that, but let's wait and see. I think that universities are doing a lot. They're doing sometimes too much. We need to concentrate on what we're doing well. And like I said, maybe the market will decide whether there are other institutions or whether there are private universities or research academies, again, that will take forward some of this.
Okay. Lynn, the gentleman in the second row here.
Chairman, I enjoyed your talk enormously, very stimulating and wide-ranging. 41 years ago, with my wife sitting next to me tonight, I came up as a refugee from an English university to start up a funny thing, thanks to Harold Wilson and Jenny Lee, called the Open University. Originally the University of the Air became the Open University. Even in our first year, 1971, we became a world leader in my subject. So that's not a bad record. I recall 2 students in particular, one in the state hospital in Carstairs. He was in the hospital in Carstairs for killing 2 people. He did the second level course, Biological Basis of Behaviour. The problem was to get a scalpel into Carstairs. He then wanted to do research. The only thing I could think of was the canes well known around Carstairs. I was going down on the Thursday, and sadly, or on Tuesday, and on the Thursday before, he was killed by another inmate in a spectacular breakout. That dreadful fellow from Dundee, you may know the story. But Simpson graduated in the McEwen Hall of the University of Edinburgh at our annual graduation ceremony. The other lady I can think of, our most brilliant and most remote student in the whole of the Open University, was French and lived on Fula, and I know about 44 people. And I went out to see her. Incredible. Those are just 2 examples of the kind of people. Altogether now, I believe the Open University has something like 16,000 students in Scotland alone. What I would like to ask you in particular, Principal, is what you think of this interesting development in Saudi Arabia. Housed.
What I think of it. What I think of the development in Saudi Arabia.
King Abdullah, you may know, but King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia has put in, I forget the figure, but it's some enormous figure like, gosh, is it 300 billion or whatever it is. Anyway, they're developing a campus of 3,000 acres by the side of the Red Sea. House. King McCullough University of Science and Technology, and I'd like to know what you think about it in particular. I did enjoy your talk.
I really enjoy your talk as well. Saudi Arabia is not the only example when it comes to that. There are other countries such as China and India who are just racing ahead when it comes to universities and new developments. It is something we really have to bear in mind because many universities are still basing their income on incoming international students. So there are two problems. One is the UKBA, as you know, has put a stop to lots of students coming in terms of visa requirements. But the other one is the competition from other countries now, which is incredible. So lots of countries, Saudi Arabia, but also China, are putting a lot of money into university developments and into education. And if you look at OECD figures and the way where the UK is, where it's developing in comparison to some other countries, there are others which are moving much faster ahead than we are now. So we have to watch carefully and continue asking for funding from wherever we can get it from in order to continue being good universities, becoming even better universities, because it will become more and more difficult to be competitive.
Sarah, there is a woman in the third back row, fifth along. And then we'll come to yourself, Raj.
Thanks very much. I'm Mary Senior. I'm from the University and College Union, and I also enjoyed so much of what you said. I think you've covered so many issues and possibly raised more questions. I think I liked what you said about universities as a means to an end and an end in themselves. Also the issue about responsibilities to stakeholders, I think that was also spot on, particularly in terms of your analysis of student questionnaires and feedback. I think that's particularly pertinent and something that we particularly struggle with in terms of representing staff in the sector. I was really touched by what you said about viewing graduations at London Met. And I suppose I was also struck with your observations around how we value teaching as well as valuing research and so on. And I suppose my question is about, I guess, the impact of the market, because I'm so fearful of how the market impacts upon funding in terms of research, in terms of valuing teaching, and also how the market impacts upon the sorts of students you saw graduating at London Met. And I mean, how do you see us moving forward? How do you see more of those students being able to access a university education in terms of down south, but also how that will impact upon rest of UK students in Scotland?
There are two different questions really. First, rest of UK students in Scotland. There have been a number of articles in the papers today as well as yesterday about the downturn of applications to universities in the UK. So the UCAS applications, a downturn of about 10%. And some people put it down to the increased fees. In Scotland, it doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. So we seem to be either holding our applications or in fact having increased them for the time being. So we might be doing something right in Scotland at least, and continue being attractive universities. Well, London Met, as you know, are the lowest student fees in the UK, so they have not gone for the 9,000, they haven't gone for the £8,000, they have gone for the lowest possible. I don't know at the moment how their recruitment is going, I have no idea. But all I can say is that I wish them well, because I spoke to so many vice-chancellors in England who are seriously worried because they really do not know what it means to their universities. They do not know. Some of them said, I don't know when I'm going to have a job. So that, because it's very, very difficult to predict how the market will react. But I know it's going to be a market, and the market will decide who can survive and who cannot survive. But at least at the moment, the IUK fees, looking at the statistics at the moment in Scotland, we seem to be the same as last year, if not better as last year. So it doesn't seem to have impacted on us yet. But I share your concerns, if that helps.
Sarah, 3 rows down, Raj Gopal.
First, I just wanted to thank you for posing a fundamental question. Although Google might have many answers to this question, in 26 years in academia, I've never been to another lecture asking this question, so thank you for that. The point, the vision you have has struck me as being a very broad one. Universities are just about there to do absolutely everything for the whole of society, and I felt that not only as a taxpayer but also as an academic, I think we need a slightly harder answer to the question. For example, why aren't we having 99% of our population going through university? They are there to educate people, they are there to have greater social inclusion, therefore why not absolutely everyone? When I went to university in 1971, I think approximately 6% of the population went to university. Now it's probably in 30% plus. And in the future, Tony Blair did say he wanted a society where 50% was university, but why stop at 50%? Why not 75% or even 100%? I think that's a critical question, and I would like to hear your answer.
Yes. I gladly say 100%, but that means we would need to redefine universities, because universities are not for everybody. If we say 100%, fine, but then we need at least twice the amount of money, and then we need to offer all kinds of courses, from the most practical to the most academic. It will be very, 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 very expensive. But then, is it still a university? That is the big question. If it is for me, then it is not a university anymore, because research-informed teaching might not be relevant for somebody who wants to do an apprenticeship in plumbing. It might be, but I would probably think it is not. So, yeah, we can go for it, have one educational institution and teach everybody, whether it's called a university or not, I don't know. I alluded to the fact that in Germany we have apprenticeships, which are very, very well regarded, and where you can get a salary that can be as much as that of a graduate, or if it's not, it is only slightly lower. But what goes with it as well is a very good reputation. So when you're doing it, you're well regarded, well respected in society. And at the moment in the UK, we do not have that yet, possibly. And as we do not have that, I would think it's very, very doubtful that putting more money into apprenticeship will actually change how successful the UK or even Scotland is going to be. I think only with a change in attitude of what apprenticeships are and can be, they can rise, and then they could be real contenders to universities. But at the moment, I know where your question is going, because what we are doing, we are accumulating more and more and more, and becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the time has come to say, that's it.
I wonder what your views are in terms of, are we expecting too much of academics, or how are we training academics for all of these multiple roles that they are now expected to?
Well, on the one hand, we're certainly expecting more of academics than we used to. There's no doubt about that. But coming back to a triangle, again, so what I think is not everybody can do everything. It is absolutely impossible. But if you are within a triangle, which is an academic discipline, and that might be engineering, yes, you can do one, but not the other. But if you work with colleagues, you might be able to do the other bit as well. Or not, or you might change to the next one, but you're part of the overall community of engineering. So the whole of engineering then makes up everything that we need to do to fulfill all the various functions we should be doing. But it can't be in one person only. There might be some stars who can do it all. But I doubt it very much. But it is the way that you structure yourself, you align yourself, and you work together. I think as a whole, we can achieve it.
Okay. Last question.
Just a question about the funding of the students.
Yes.
If you go back, can we learn anything from the 1940s after the Second World War, when local authorities held funding for education, and students, no matter what their background, could be paid for and helped to go to university, but it depended on the quality of their exam results. And this allowed a lot of people, particularly in the West Riding of Yorkshire, they had a new education officer who came in 1945, and if you managed to pass the exam and get a place at the university, then you were funded for the whole time. And at that stage also, you had ex-service people coming who were also funded to take university degrees. And it was a very optimistic time to be at a university in the late 1940s, early 50s. And how can we use some of that knowledge to encourage more local authorities to recast their funding?
Yeah. I think the question is the amount of money rather than the will, because it's a wonderful system, clearly. Exactly, yes. Yeah. Any politicians in the lecture theatre here? The money, well, I can only agree with you, but at the moment we clearly do not see the money, and students do suffer financially. Yes, some students do get support. What we are doing with the RUK piece, the rest of UK piece, we offer bursaries to students who cannot afford to come to our Scottish universities. We are very generous in our bursaries as well to make sure that they can study and get a degree, whatever their financial background is. But it is never enough.
It's interesting that the West Riding in particular were very careful.
Yeah.
If you got a place at Oxford or Cambridge, they would only fund you after the first year, because you might not socially fit in.
Oh dear. Okay, I might not recommend that. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to bring the session to an end because I have learned from bitter experience not to stand for too long before a thirsty audience and a glass of wine. There will be an opportunity for further debate over that said glass of wine, and if you're lucky enough, you might be able to put a question that you want to put to Petra to her outside. Petra, can I thank you very much indeed for a stimulating, thought-provoking professorial address. I think, as many of the questioners have said, you've raised some important issues and some challenging issues. The role of universities in terms of creating positive social change, for me, is one of the most important that you talked about. Also, the argument that universities are multifaceted and that to only allow universities, or to force some universities only to fulfil a narrow role, would be to the detriment of students and the staff of those universities. Therefore, I think the point about rebalancing the diversity of functions within any university is a particularly important one. I think your final point about universities in terms of being democratically run, and ideally they should continue to be democratically run with an honest and transparent dialogue with stakeholders, is one that I'm sure everybody in the room would be keen to take forward. And finally, I think in the context of the Scottish Government's white paper, putting the learners at the centre, this address has been particularly timely. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join with me in thanking Professor Petra Wend for this professorial address?